Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live. There's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using stock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. We are joined by 10th Man, Righteous Force, Chocolate Sane, Paul Hall, and a whole bunch of people in Discord, so welcome one and all.
Good morning, all.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. Any signs of a physical geometric sphere edge, formerly known as Earth curve?
Not from Burbank Airport.
No.
Any evidence of axial rotation of the Earth-based variety?
I don't see the Earth or feel the Earth moving.
Not even after a 5-hour spectacular with Zanuck trying to argue for the Coriolis effect? I'm amazed.
Oh yeah, that was something.
That's more of a head spinning than an Earth spinning.
It was useful. I learned a couple more intricacies to their magic trick. That to me was useful.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was great.
To summarise, all Coriolis claims are an observation from a non-inertial reference frame. As soon as you start to apply any sort of angular momentum retention to a projectile, that is absolutely nothing to do with Coriolis effect, because Coriolis effect, as just stated, is only ever an observation from a non-inertial spinning reference frame like a roundabout. So what the projectile's doing and what its velocity is and what it's retaining is irrelevant of an observation from a spinning reference frame. So that was an intricacy that we'd stated it in terms of our clear understanding of the Coriolis effect in and of itself, and where it's fiddled with by them to confuse and convolute, and we're just unpacking it, and we're getting better and better at doing so, and that's one of those things. Moving on. Hey, Owen, perfect timing. Go on.
Hang on, Nathan. You actually covered that way back in 2019 when he first let out that's what he was doing. But the Slat show that you did, the Bonanza 5-hour, whatever long it was, that show, you unpacked it piece by piece. It was wonderful. Thank you.
As I say, it was a painful 5 hours of debating this stuff just to get one little intricacy to an argument we understood pretty well, but obviously there's always things to learn within every argument, and Coriolis effect, or the claim that they have proof that Earth spins with a form of two reference frames, one spinning under the other, the assumed spinning Earth being the one, the atmosphere or anything that's not attached to Earth being the other, and then justification for why they don't have any deviation is what you actually end up arguing about with the conservation of momentum, which is not applicable to Coriolis. As I say, Coriolis is only ever your observation, what you see in your reference frame on a non-inertial spinning reference frame. And what you will see
So
Go on.
So I see a pattern here then. We have a geometric, they say we have a geometric horizon, we just can't see it. We have Earth spinning, we just can't see it.
Well, no, they say quite the contrary. They say we can see it. We see it in the form of a Coriolis drift or deviation from your vantage point, and it's detailed things like you watching a ball curve through a goal because Earth's rotated under the goal. So they do claim it occurs, but they only ever example it with things that stay in the air for a couple of seconds, when in reality an aeroplane, which is in the air for a considerable amount of time, would show a massive amount of this drift from the ground. If you were watching it, it would seem to curve in a great big massive curve, because you've got the Earth rotating under the plane, as per the Coriolis effect on a spinning Earth claim. Coriolis effect being real, the effect being you would see the curved trajectory of the plane, even though it's travelling straight, because you're rotating underneath. But if that's the case, i.e. Earth rotates under planes, as per the Coriolis claim, then the flight times are shortened, and they're not. And to get around the fact that they're not shortened, they start arguing about what the projectile, in this instance the plane, will do. And the plane has nothing to do with you observing a plane seem to curve. It's got nothing to do with what the plane's doing, how fast it's going, or anything else. It's just you rotating underneath it, regardless of what it's doing. So next time someone tries to argue about the angular retention of velocity in any particular linear or angular momentum way, just point out that no, that's nothing to do with Coriolis. Coriolis is only ever an observation from a spinning reference frame, not what the projectile's doing, because the projectile doesn't have to be a projectile. If you're on a roundabout and you're watching a lamppost cemented into the ground, you can observe a Coriolis effect in that, because it's not on the rotating platform with you. So the lamppost will seem to come towards you and seem to go away. It's not a projectile though, it's concreted into the ground. But you're still seeing Coriolis drift, because it's not on the non-inertial spinning reference frame. Ergo, it doesn't matter what the projectile does, whether it's speeding up, slowing down, retaining this, not retaining that. It makes no difference. All you need for the Coriolis effect is you to be rotating underneath something that isn't on your rotating platform. That's it.
But Nathan,
Right.
Coriolis
I wanna-
effect doesn't exist because things don't ever leave reference frames.
Yeah, unless you're 20 minutes later in the conversation, then things do leave reference frame if required to justify why you don't have deviation.
I would say another question to definitely ask that would be, is in your narrative, is the Earth always spinning? Because I asked Danik that the other day and he said yes. And then later on proceeded to tell us how it's not spinning when you're throwing a ball or a plane goes off in a certain direction, but as opposed to another direction. Like it's supposed to just start spinning if you turn south. No, you just said it's always spinning, which would have to mean it's always spinning. Doesn't matter what direction the projectile is going in. So they destroy their argument right there.
The reason they use a projectile like a bullet is because you have drop in the bullet over a certain amount of distance. The bullet's going to hit air and going to create resistance, and the bullet's going to start dropping. And then you also have winds, and so when shooting long distances, you have to anticipate all these things. And through testing, they know how high you must aim at a target. So by the time the bullet gets to the target at this set distance, it's going to hit the target. Now, I've done this myself on my property with my rifle as well as my handgun. So my projectile doesn't have eyes to see anything. I have the eyes. I know what's happening, and I have to anticipate wind resistance and all this other stuff. So for him to go and say that the perspective now is from the projectile, that means he went from Zanuck to a bullet. This is such nonsense. As Nathan says, if the Earth is spinning underneath a bullet, then it's spinning under an airplane and everything else, and that obviously cannot be demonstrated.
I developed a twitch the other day, just to let you know. After that 5 hours, I was twitching.
You got a twitch.
Yeah, they don't know their own argument. That's the problem.
Well, maybe here's a better way to ask the question, though. Maybe instead of saying spinning, does the Earth move underneath the bullet, no matter which direction? If the bullet has to slow down or speed up or curve, the Earth is moving underneath, not necessarily spinning underneath. But if you say moving underneath, that's a different way of saying it.
But what you're essentially asking, Paul, and you're absolutely right, is to get them to concede that what the Coriolis effect actually is, i.e. you're on a roundabout and you're watching a lamppost, i.e. you're looking up at the bulb above the roundabout, but it's not actually attached, it's cemented into the ground. Well, you've got to then get a globehead to concede that the lamppost isn't spinning with you. That's what you've got to get them to concede, because basically they'll juxtapose Coriolis effect with you rotating underneath something with not having any Coriolis effect whatsoever on a convoluted cluster screw discussion about conservation of angular or linear momentum. Which isn't Coriolis. That's the point. In other words, let's just rephrase that. This is quantum erasers method. Immediately get them to define what Coriolis effect is. One reference frame spinning under another. That's what Coriolis effect is. You if you're observing Coriolis effect, will be on a spinning platform of some description. Now, that's very simple to put into analogy. You're on a roundabout, you throw a ball, it seems to curve away from you because you carry on rotating underneath it after you've thrown it. It's really simple. Now, that effect should just directly translate into Earth if it's spinning. That's what they claim. Instead, we end up with them describing this not actual curving as having an actual spin direction in the form of hurricanes. Well, no, Coriolis is a not actual deviation. In other words, the ball seems to curve because you're spinning underneath it. It's actually travelling straight. Hurricanes have got nothing to do with the Coriolis effect, unless you're physically part of the hurricane whirling around and you happen to glance up at an aeroplane and go, oh, look, it looks like it's curving because I'm travelling in a circle in this hurricane. But other than you being actually an observer in a hurricane spinning around, hurricanes have got nothing to do with Coriolis effect. Coriolis effect is merely you looking at a lamppost from a roundabout and watching it seem to come towards you and seem to go away. That's all it is. It's nothing to do with anything actually drifting. The lamppost isn't moving in my example.
Well, and also remember the tangential velocity issue is also in play, because the higher altitude you go, the tangential velocity starts to change. So the Earth either will be, you'll be starting, in a sense, you'll have to move faster than the Earth is spinning underneath of you to keep up. So
No,
either way,
wrong.
as soon as you
Stop.
leave it, you're done.
Stop. No, wrong. You're immediately talking about what the projectile does. Nothing to do with Coriolis effect, Paul. You have to keep up with the... No. Coriolis effect is merely an observation from a spinning platform. What you have to do if you jump off that platform and you become the projectile in your example is nothing to do with Coriolis effect. You don't have to speed up, you don't have to slow down. All you have to do is observe something that's not on your spinning platform. That's it. The observation is Coriolis, not what the projectile's doing. My projectile's not moving, it's a lamppost concreted into the ground, Paul. I don't need anything in any form whatsoever of movement in that second inertial reference frame, and never will they ever have any descriptions of what's happening in that inertial reference frame applicable either, because what's happening in the inertial reference frame is irrelevant. All that matters is you, as an observer, are rotating underneath it. So if it's directly translatable to a ball Earth, and on a roundabout I throw a ball, it seems to curve. On a ball Earth, you throw a ball, it seems to curve if it's spinning. It's just that simple. Now, in the form of an aeroplane, that's like a glorified ball. It should be curving from your vantage point. Now, when you start detailing what the plane would need to do, it's irrelevant of Coriolis. Because the projectile, you can't have the plane with a Coriolis meter, coping with the Coriolis deflection, because it's non-existent from the plane. Not in any way relevant, because Coriolis is an observation of it seeming to curve. So as soon as you step outside what you seem to curve, and start detailing what the plane or lamppost is doing, it's not Coriolis anymore.
Hey Nathan, hey everybody.
Hey Brian.
Yeah.
And hey Arwin as well.
That's right, Nathan. That's right, Nathan. Because they want you to argue within the begging the question. So they want to argue that the higher you go, rather than stay on the subject, which is Coriolis.
Yeah.
Can you say something to me, Nathan?
You can, but I'll just round that out, Brian. You're right, exactly, 10th man. The higher you go, well, what, as a projectile? Well, no, you're not ever going to be detailing that, because it's me witnessing you going higher and higher and higher and higher, and seeming to curve as you do so, from my vantage point spinning underneath you on a roundabout. That's Coriolis, what I see of you curving. That's Coriolis. As soon as you say, well, I've got to keep up with the ground below the roundabout. I'm a drone and I'm keeping up with the X that I've taped below me because I'm conserving the momentum of the... Well, you're describing the projectile. That's not Coriolis anymore. Coriolis is only the observation from the reference frame that's spinning. Beyond that, nothing's important. Go on, Brian.
No, sorry, I thought you had said something to me. But on this actual subject, QE puts this straight in that audio clip he did over the weekend on Fight the Flat Earth. Because Fight the Flat Earth claims that that tangential velocity is important. But if you're on a non-inertial reference frame that's moving around, spinning, then every part of that has the same angular velocity, and that's the only thing that matters. So tangential velocity has not
You're wrong in the same way Paul's wrong. No, the tangential velocity that you're going to be referencing in the Coriolis effect is zero. You're only ever referencing what you see on a non-inertial reference frame. You and the reference frame are as one, And in comparison to the reference frame itself and you've got no momentum to preserve, because the only description of the claimed curve or the apparent deviation that the trajectory of the bullet in the inertial reference frame is going to be described with is only ever you seeing a curve, because your non-inertial reference frame is the one that gives you the apparent drift. So you're seeing the ball seem to curve from a non-inertial frame of reference. In other words, you and everything around you is one thing, not moving, not with inertia. The inertia is, in Coriolis effect, described in, guess what? The inertial reference frame. And why is it the inertial reference frame? Well, because that's where you're seeing the apparent drift. Apparent meaning not actual. So in the inertial reference frame, I've got a lamppost. Is it moving? No, it's concreted into the ground. Does it look like it's moving as I turn on the roundabout? Yeah, it looks like it's got inertia. It's only apparently, though. It's not actual drift that it's performing as you see it come towards you. It's concreted into the ground. So therefore, when you're describing the effect of Coriolis, and the effect of Coriolis is a not actual deviation in the inertial reference frame, so the movement, the inertia, the not actual drift is in the frame of reference that you're not a part of, and the reference frame you are a part of is non-inertial. So what are you going to retain if you're going to stay within the confines of describing Coriolis effect? Your non-inertial reference frame's inertia? Well, there isn't any. Oh, so we're going to immediately start describing the inertia in the bullet. Well, that's got nothing to do with Coriolis, because Coriolis is me observing that bullet seeming to curve when it's sat on top of the lamppost, not moving at all.
No, I totally agree with all that. I know that. But what QE says about angular momentum or angular velocity was that that argument that the Bohr put forward about tangential velocity is completely utter rubbish, because if you're on a non-inertial reference frame, then all of it is moving, so it has angular velocity, nothing to do like it. Just his point was that the angular velocity totally blows that a tangential velocity nonsense out of the water. That was the point of the.
I see what you're saying. So if you're saying you're retaining the angular velocity, well, then you'd be curving after you left the platform. So the fact that you're going to have or assert that there's a Coriolis effect must mean that you've got linear as opposed to angular. And the two aren't, they're mutually exclusive in this regard, because if you had one, you wouldn't be observing Coriolis deviation if it's preserving the angular momentum. Therefore, it is actually curving. So you're not observing an apparent deviation anymore. You're observing an actual deviation, which isn't Coriolis.
I was only talking about in his reference to the likes of the ballers talking about tangential velocity being a part of, and you have to be taking that into account for a Coriolis effect. You don't. He just puts that to bed by saying that if you're on a non-inertial reference frame that's moving, then every part of that has the same angular velocity, and that's the only part that matters. That's basically, he's basically saying the same thing. He's saying that whole thing is moving, you're on it, and the thing you're looking at is not, or it is moving, but it's moving in a straight line, and it appears to deviate. Yeah.
But what the first part of what Nathan said is that if you go there with the tangential velocity, then you're in the begging the question argument already, when you have to define what Coriolis is. And it's a apparent deviation. It's not actually moving. You're moving.
I know that, Tint. I know all that. I think maybe listen to QE's piece on that he did about that'll explain it.
I know you know it. I'm not saying anything against that. What I'm saying is, if let's say there was a baller in front of me now and we're having a discussion, and he says tangential, I would say that's not Coriolis.
Quick shout out to DJ Neo Shaman. Keep destroying ignorance and globe lies, one mind at a time. Hashtag Black Swan for the win. Love you guys. Hashtag Carpe Diem. Hashtag no fear. Hashtag peace be with ballbusters and loved ones. Thanks sign and kissy smiley face sign. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat, DJ Neo Shaman. Really appreciate your support.
So they want to argue something else other than Coriolis at that point, is what I'm saying.
No, you're absolutely correct, because that's the first place they start going to. They start going to that tangential velocity nonsense. They start, they start, like, basically you start getting asked for, have you got the mathematics to support blah blah blah. It's like mathematics has nothing to do with a visual effect. It's just an effect.
Well, they're in bigger trouble if they want to go there, because if they want to go to tangential velocity, then the Earth is actually what? Rotating at different speeds the higher you go, correct?
This is their claim, yeah, because it's making smaller circles.
Fine.
You know, if you're going towards the top.
Fine. Then why is the flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to LA not shorter then?
Yeah, they don't get, they never let the argument get to there. I had this argument, and they all let it get to there.
Hold on. You're talking at cross purposes. Your 10th man's talking about the deviation as Earth rotates underneath, and Brian's talking about as you raise in elevation, you've got a bigger circumference to traverse. Therefore, it's a first law of thermodynamics violation if you're asserting that you're retaining the angular momentum, because as you increase in altitude, you're going to have to increase in speed to match the velocity of the ground beneath you, because you're travelling in a greater circumference. So that's a first law of thermodynamics violation. I think you're talking at cross purposes, though.
Well, they're two different arguments, and that's what I was trying to say. So I think what Brian was saying is that ballers will always have something else to go to, and that's what he was role-playing. And I was saying, well, I wouldn't even let it get there, because tangential speed has nothing to do with Coriolis.
Quick shout out to Rakia Life. Says, Lake Pontchartrain optics were angry this weekend, my friend. Curved view, but never measured. He had some donuts. So Rakia Life did a Pontchartrain observation, and I think I'm not certain because I didn't question it, but I think it's the bridges in the far distance. But he's got so much refraction they've curled into donuts. It's really quite amusing. Check it out. It's on Rakia Life's channel. Thank you very much for the super chat, Rakia Life. Are we exhausted any evidence of axial rotation? Should we move on?
I'll just say thanks for handing my butt to me. Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it.
It's not that it's not that I want to hand you your butt. It's excellent. I'd rather you did say things like that, because it means I get another opportunity to point out that as soon as you start detailing what's happening in the inertial reference frame with the trajectory of an aeroplane or a ball or anything else, you're no longer detailing what's happening from your vantage point in regards to Coriolis, which is only ever applicable from the spinning reference frame. So who cares what the bullet or drone or anything else is doing? It's not relevant to the argument if they've got one for Coriolis. So as soon as you can take them away from that, well, what's happening is it's taking off with the speed of the Earth rotating, and it's retaining that, and then technically going backwards till it speeds up enough to overcome the speed it's retained. None of this is relevant to you observing apparent deviation from a non-inertial reference frame that's spinning as you spin on it. That's nothing to do with any of that. So that's just their way of immediately juxtaposing what you should be seeing if you've got Coriolis with what's happening to a projectile in an inertial reference frame that you're supposed to be observing if you're describing Coriolis. You're no longer describing it, you're describing what's happening to the trajectory of a bullet that could be being observed and talked about if they were still talking about Coriolis, but they're not. That's the point. Any more? Can we move on?
Yeah, one more. I'm sorry, but you just triggered it in my mind. But that's the temptation when they say that. It's on me, and people like me want to jump on it because it's so obvious the plane can't be going backwards. But it's another argument. It's not the Coriolis, so we have to really hold our ground when talking about subjects and say that's another subject. We'll get to that. Your plane going backwards later. But what is Coriolis? What's the causes of Coriolis? And this is the temptation is when they throw one of those things. Oh, you just want to go there because it's so stupid, but you just get off Coriolis when you do.
Well, you can, but you've got to be, without blowing too much smoke up his ass, at the quantum eraser level, where you're detailing the absurdity of their argument because they won't let it go. They've gone round in a circle 5 times asserting, it's retaining the angular momentum of the Earth, and it's flying backwards. You're only going to get to that stage if you can lead them very, very subtly down that path till they admit that, like Zanuck did. Yeah, plane's literally flying backwards in his world. It's nuts. But you can only get them to the point of absurdity if you're pretty skilled and understand it. And, to be perfectly honest, even myself, I wouldn't try that, which is why I take the much more brutal approach and say, no, this is where I'll draw the line with, someone like Paul. It doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't be arguing that way. You do whatever you like. Same with space, right? If someone wants to argue that rockets can't work in space, feel free. My point would be that, well, yeah, you can cut that off at the legs by pointing out that you can't have gas pressure without a container. So therefore, why argue about whether or not rockets will work in a region that doesn't exist? It seems pointless. Even if you win your argument and prove beyond certitude that rockets won't work in a sky vacuum, all you've done is debunked a bit of an element of NASA, as opposed to the entirety of the heliocentric worldview that the sky is a vacuum. So it's just one being more effective. In terms of arguing about what the trajectory based on their argument of a bullet or a plane does in the inertial reference frame, in other words, sod all to do with Coriolis at this point. We're not detailing the observation from the non-inertial reference frame, which is to say we're not describing Coriolis. But if you take them down their own path, to the point of absurdity as Quantum Eraser does, you've got to be acutely aware of where they'll try and use that to their advantage, beg the question, and just use it to say, well, you're already admitting Earth spinning, and that's precisely what Zanuck did. So he said, when he started to use the argument, I stopped him. No, you're not just going to dictate that the plane's moving at 800 miles an hour and it's on the tarmac, not moving. No, you don't get to beg the question. His reason for utilising your incorrect assertion that Earth is turning with the plane moving at 800 miles an hour leaves you with the plane going backwards, which is why he's asserting it. Zanuck will only use that to beg the question. In other words, go through the process of allowing the audience to hear that the ground is moving with the plane moving at 800 miles an hour immediately without any proof whatsoever at the beginning of his argument. So then he can spend 25, 30 minutes, an hour, 5 hours arguing about whatever he likes. He's got the begging the question fallacy in the middle of it, at the beginning of his argument, and to the audience's realisation, all you're doing is arguing about how and why Earth is turning, because the begging the question fallacy's been let in. But that, like I say, it does take perhaps even a bit of teamwork, because Quantum Eraser wouldn't be capable of then turning around to Zanuck and saying, no, you don't get to say if Earth is spinning, blah 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 blah. I only get to do that, but I can. As the moderator between those two, I can say, why the hell can you just say Earth is spinning at 800 miles an hour with a plane on the tarmac without any justifiable reason, when that's only going to give you a lack of Coriolis effect, the claim proof we spin. Any more for any more.
Okay, I will. One more thing.
So I go after Paul. Okay, Paul.
Okay, then that begs another question. Brings up another question. How can an observation do anything?
It can't. That's why when you're talking about the projectile and what it's retaining, it's irrelevant. Correct, Paul. Very succinctly asked.
I find it's a good way, though, to elucidate how much they double speak, because when Zanuck is detailing how the plane is conserving momentum when it's taking off due west with the Earth spinning west to east, well, the Earth is spinning west to east, which is why it's conserving that momentum, right? Well, 2 minutes prior, he said that the Earth doesn't spin under the airplane unless it turns south or north. So it's just another way to show how their doublespeak just doesn't work.
Yeah, but you've got to have these measures in place, and people who are capable of arguing in that manner if you essentially have a worldview and religion that isn't the case, i.e. a spinning ball Earth in a vacuum. If it's not the case, you're never going to have a coherent argument. You're never going to form logical consistency, because Earth isn't turning. It'd be blatantly bloody obvious if it was, same as if it was curved.
Just to address what Ken said about the airplane.
Maybe, can I just add something?
Go ahead, George.
1 second.
Party poet. You're making coffee or something, my friend. You're making a lot of racket. Go ahead, Brian, and then George, if you want to go after.
Yeah, I just want to say that when it comes to the argument of the airplanes, it depends on who you're dealing with, because Zanuck will argue that the airplane will do certain things due to because of the movement of the globe Earth and different latitudes. But someone else, like Fight the Flat Earth, for instance, he told me the weekend, I'm using him as a reference because he just told me it, that airplanes don't experience any Coriolis. So some of them just take airplanes completely out of the argument and try to argue that they're not involved at all.
But he's correct.
Well, he is, but
you don't experience. Let me just break that down. You don't experience Coriolis from the aeroplane. You might go, oh, what are you talking about? There's always planes being talked about. No, you, from the ground, watch a plane that's flying straight. Now, in reality, when I watch a plane, it flies straight because it is straight. However, the globe Earth claim is that when you observe an aeroplane, its path is curving. Now, why is it curving? Well, because Earth's turning underneath. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. If it's travelling on the exact same latitude, there's not going to be any Coriolis deviation. It's travelling on the same exact latitude. So therefore, why would you see any deviation? You wouldn't. You've just got Earth rotating underneath, shortening the flight times, which is our argument. But the point is, if there is going to be any deviation that you see from the ground, it's going to be because the plane is travelling straight, and from your vantage point on the ground, it seems to curve. Now, the plane hasn't got to account for anything. What's he going to account for? Oh, quick, change the Coriolis meter. There's a guy watching us on the ground, and he seems to think we're curving. So quick, let's correct for that. No, they don't have to correct for a damn thing. It's an apparent deflection seen from the ground. So the guy in the plane doesn't know that there's a guy on the ground watching, and from his point of view, it looks like it's curving. Number one, it only looks like it's curving. And number two, the plane hasn't got the slightest clue of anything occurring from the ground. It's not on the ground. So there's no accounting for Coriolis in projectiles. But that's the magic trick. They want to talk all day long about what the projectile's doing, when I can example Coriolis with an example that's got a concreted lamppost that's not moving an inch.
Oh yeah, you're right. The pilot of that plane wouldn't have to account for anything until he's trying to land on a spinning runway. That'll be fun.
Yeah, precisely. He's only got to worry about the fact the ground's spinning underneath him, not the fact that I might see his plane curving when it's in the air. He hasn't got to worry about that. Yeah, but as Chocolate rightly points out, if the ground's spinning underneath him, he's got a big problem when he comes into land. An enormous problem that wouldn't allow planes to land unless they took massive steps to account for the fact the ground's turning underneath them, which is our point. It would not only shorten flight times, it would make landing incredibly difficult.
Well, you would need special approach, paths. Like, oh, you want to land there with the supposed spin, then you got to approach it a little bit more to the side, and this should be all mapped out for every pilot to take.
They would have to.
Approach.
They would only have to have landings east to west and west to east. They can land in the other direction because they have already enough troubles with winds.
Sure.
Right.
And also,
My point is, what you're identifying is the Coriolis causes. Now, what causes us to see an apparent drift is Earth rotating under a plane. Well, the aircraft's definitely going to have to concern himself with what's giving me that effect. I'm only seeing that effect because Earth's rotating under the plane. So the cause of that effect, the plane's going to have to worry about. The fact that it's claimed the Earth's rotating under the plane. Now, no plane's ever having to cope with that, ever. That's why it debunks the claim we're spinning. But the only thing we're going to ever argue about from this point forward, certainly on this show, is what we will see from a non-inertial spinning reference frame. As soon as someone starts saying, well, it's retaining velocity, what is? The projectile, I don't care. I'm not the projectile. What I observe of something doesn't matter if it's concreted into the ground or moving at 1,000 miles an hour, gaining speed, losing speed, it doesn't matter. Coriolis effect is me from the ground seeing it seem to curve. And if my lamppost seems to curve towards me and curve away from me, I don't have to worry about its retention of angular velocity. It's concreted into the ground. But all they're going to do all day is talk about the projectile. Like Simon Dan the moron shows us a guy bouncing up and down, not drifting. Well, all we need to see for Coriolis effect is me watching that and a drift occurring. Not no drift. Not what the guy does, because the guy and what he does bouncing up and down is nothing to do with Coriolis effect. It's merely what we observe of the guy.
Yeah.
well, and technically, they can't argue Coriolis. Technically, if you really think about it, there is in their paradigm, in the globe paradigm, there is no inertial reference frame. There can't be. Everything's moving.
Yeah, they haven't got a second reference frame.
Look, they've been arguing from the start on. It's also contradictive. They say the Coriolis effect is there due to Earth spin. You just can never detect it. Yet claims are still being put out that there are sightings due to Coriolis effect, despite the bottom line claim approach being there is no sign of Coriolis effect that you can measure, even though you're supposed to think it's actually spinning. It's been like this from the start. You know that, right, Nathan?
Yeah, it should be Coriolis effect. If Earth's spinning, we should observe Coriolis effect. That's the positive assertion from the globe Earth religion. We spin, therefore we've got Coriolis effect. That's what globeheads state as their rhetoric. But we don't see any. So what we fight about is why we don't see any deviation, why we don't have any Coriolis effect, why Earth isn't rotating underneath anything to give you Coriolis effect. In other words, we don't argue about what's causing Coriolis effect, we argue about why we don't have any.
We get told that when you ask how come we don't see any of this, you get told that you do, you just don't understand. That's the exact words you get.
Yeah, that's just another magic trick. Go ahead, George. We've been waiting in the sidelines for ages now.
Sorry, I just wanted to add here a little thing that I don't think we are seeing the whole thing, because they are asserting that the observation that we see of the Coriolis is the sun, because the sun on their paradigm is stopped, and we are spinning under the sun. That's the only observation that we see. This could be explainable centuries ago, but not now that we can do flights, we can travel on airplanes, we can travel in many ways. So we don't see this observation, because the Coriolis, the movement is up and down. It's a linear movement, but the explanation is up and down, and we don't ever observe this in nature.
I understand. So you're saying that, given that the rhetoric we get in the trenches from someone like Zanuck is no, you'll only ever get the second reference frame, the inertial reference frame, if you leave Earth and it's gas pressure that's not filling the vacuum, and then you can have your inertial reference frame observing back down to Earth as a sphere. Well, in that example, you would assert it to have the Coriolis effect. Obviously, you're going to be back on the the non-inertial spinning ball Earth as it's claimed to be. And the only thing that's going to give you that is the vector that you would observe of the sun's trajectory, because in the solar system reference frame description, you've got the sun fixed at the centre and us moving around it. So therefore, its movement is only an apparent movement from our vantage point. Hence, you get the vector, the curved trajectory, the Coriolis effect with the sun, right? That's what you're saying. We're turning underneath it. It's the only other thing in the other reference frame.
Exactly, because we not only we're going around the sun, we are spinning on our own axis, and that is the movement that they say is the Coriolis. This is the only thing that they can attach to Earth on that paradigm. It's the only one. The thing is, when we actually see reality, if an object on a straight line, or an helicopter or a drone going on a straight line up and down, if you are spinning underneath it, when you look at it, you see the Coriolis effect. Now, if you have the reverse image, if you are on the drone looking at the merry-go-round spinning, what you are observing is a centrifugal force, which is completely different, nothing to do with Coriolis whatsoever.
Precisely. Well put.
Good point.
Right, let's move on. I'm not going to ask if anyone's got anything else to add. Although we have got Mole Man in now. Has anybody taken him off mute?
Wait, we haven't talked enough about the Coriolis effect?
Vanished. I know there is. No, he's been off mute. That's fine. Okay, any evidence of the distance to the sun?
It's over there.
I know this one. I know this.
I know. Go ahead, George.
Well, from here to the sun is the same distance as from the sun here.
How profound. How do you know that? What if the sun is a reflection of something else? In other words, what you're seeing isn't necessarily the point source of the light itself, or whatever generates what we call that light. Therefore, the distance between whatever creates it and what we see isn't going to be half, is it? You just don't know what it is to make that assertion.
Even if we did know, we cannot measure something that it never stops. It's always in movement anyway.
Even from our own side, no concession. I love it. So would you not agree then that you'd have to know what it is and how it's created in order to make the assertion that your distance from us to it, that would be what we see of it, the apparent position of the sun, may not be the same as the distance from the sun to us if it's got a different actual source? Because what the source is and what we apparently see might be different. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'm entirely with you. I don't want to assert that I know what the sun is. I'm just saying you wouldn't know. You don't know what the sun is. You will never know. Even if you knew, if it was a solid thing, you couldn't measure something that is in movement. Even
there it is.
Even on their part of that.
There it is. You inserted it for me. If it was a solid thing, your assertion would make perfect sense. Or you know, in some way a physical entity. It doesn't have to necessarily be solid. But you know, if it was a if we knew what it was, your statement would make a lot more sense, and it wouldn't be so pulled apart. Even though I'm doing it kind of with tongue in cheek.
Right, a physical entity opposing a holographic light-based entity,
or anything else for that matter. That's just one in a million possibilities, right, Arwen? And I'm not saying you're wrong. Definitely not saying you're right.
It's
like the distance to the gas giant.
Hold on, Arwen. Go ahead, George.
Sorry, I was saying, like, they say we know the distance to the gas giant.
Yeah. Well, they know what it is and where it is, and they've already decided based on Kepler's third law of interplanetary motion and Christian Huygens' assumption of Venus being the same R value as Earth that's been assumed in the first instance. Given that they know all that stuff because they made it up themselves, they know what it is and where it is and how much it weighs and a lot of other nonsense that we wouldn't ever dare assert. But we'd be ridiculed for not asserting it and telling them a new fairy tale now, wouldn't we? Well, what do you say the sun is then? I don't know, it's amazing, isn't it? Don't know, I haven't got a clue. Well, that's outrageous, therefore your model fails. What model? What are you talking about? Yeah, your flat earth model fails if you can't tell me what the sun is with a new Just So story that's equally as compelling as the nonsense these dudes made up.
Nathan, at best, all you've done is disprove the radius of the Earth.
Christian Huygens.
The radius of the distance to the sun?
Let's move on. Any scientific evidence of gravity?
I was told the weekend that there is. Sorry, go on. Our and I'll talk after.
Okay, I was just gonna say fall down, go boom boom, or
mostly down.
Move up, go poof poof. You know?
Go down, go boom boom. Mostly down.
Or float up, go poof poof.
You were told what at the weekend? What have you done this weekend, Brian?
I was debating flight to flat out there or flight to night, and I was told by him that when I asked, is there any viable scientific hypothesis ever put forward for gravity, and backed by hypothesis test, he said, "Jay, there's loads." I said, "From who?" Nothing. I mean, quick change of subject. You know? So according to some of them, there's loads. Then the Cavendish thing came out, which is nonsense. But I put that to bed. But
which leads on to the
that's what's going on there.
Which leads on to the next question, which is why any scientific evidence for gravity has been expanded into any single viable hypothesis from any of the fields of astronomy, cosmology, or astrophysics, because none exist. They don't have any science. It's all pseudoscience.
Exactly.
And somehow the Cavendish experiment weighed the Earth, right? Is that the paradigm?
That was its original intention.
By the Cavendish experiment.
That was its original intention, yes, to weigh Earth. And then derive...
Yeah, I asked what...
Go on.
The density of the Earth.
Yeah, I asked him, what was the naturally observed phenomenon? And I don't remember exactly what I got, but it wasn't anything substantial.
Should we list off a couple?
Naturally observed phenomena.
You ask for the natural phenomena in Cavendish, because you're typically on the route of establishing what the cause and effect is, IV-DV relationship, formulated hypothesis, actualization, and the first step is, what's the phenomena? And you can have a couple, right? Normally you'll go immediately with the globe head. This is off the rails so far it's untrue, which is to say you get something like apple falling from tree as the observed phenomena, right? Or you get the actual observed contraption phenomena, in quotes, which would be torsion bar twist. Or there's a third. They just beg the question, which is they say gravity. They just say gravity, which you're not observing.
It's weird that they would even call it an experiment from the gate, because if he was trying to measure the density of the Earth, that's not an experiment. That's not a cause and effect relationship. That's just measuring the density.
That's maths, right? And that's what they
What are they doing?
Spot on. They haven't got a phenomena. They're doing a bit of maths with a bit of equipment, calling it an experiment, claiming scientific validity when they make up a massive just so story. You know, they need a lot of equipment to make that look valid, and that's precisely what they've done. They still teach it in colleges. It's amazing.
But without gravity, how could Cavendish have possibly weighed the Earth in his experiment?
It's not an experiment. So there's no observed phenomena. Did chocolate... Is chocolate's mic working? Am I just hearing things? Is it because he's not actually here and I've got his voice in my head, the voice of reason, chocolate swirling around in my head?
No, it's working. I heard it.
He just explained there's no phenomena, Arwin.
I know, but I asked, but how then could you? You know? And your answer was, yeah, you can't. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, right. So how could my unicorn weighing machine work if there wasn't any unicorns? I mean, come on.
Indeed.
I wonder if there was any assumptions in
experiments
his calculations of the density of the Earth. Was there any assumptions?
What, like assuming gravity itself?
Or anything, assuming maybe the radius, assuming maybe gravity, maybe any assumptions.
All of the above.
What is officially the
All
weight
of the above.
Earth?
They're assuming mass attracts mass. They're assuming Earth has a sphere radius. Yeah, they're assuming all of that, Paul. Or was that the reason you asked?
Yeah, that's the reason I asked. So if there's any assumptions, and you know what, when you assume things, what it does, does anybody know when you assume things?
Makes an ass of you and me.
Yep, you got it.
Hey, question, guys, and to you too, Nathan. Like, what is the supposed weight of the Earth? You know, and how did they come to that number specifically? You know, it's supposed to be, yeah, it's a mock-up experiment, whatever, to weigh it, but they calculate something. But isn't it just like the distance to the sun? Basically, an arbitrary number that is set. The weight of the Earth.
They got it
What
through
was it?
Cavendish. I'm not being funny, Arwin. Are you hungover or something? We're literally talking
No.
about exactly that right now. You do realise that, right?
Yeah.
That's what they did. They claimed Cavendish did that. That's what they did to weigh the Earth. Cavendish.
Right. But what is the number? What is the supposed number of that weight?
You're asking me to Google search the weight of the Earth. Can you not do this after housekeeping?
Okay, I could do it right now.
Okay.
Weight of
Wait a minute, but don't you, wait a minute, before you say something is weighing something, don't you have to define what you're doing? So what is weight?
Or what is
Oh, wow.
mass? I see where you're going now. Right. So you'd need to understand what, if you're trying to establish the mass of something, you have to define what mass is. Is that where you're going, Paul?
Of course, yeah, I'm going that direction. So what is mass? What is weight?
Undefined, unfortunately, Paul. So you find me a definition of mass. You won't. It's undefined.
Wow, they have a density for Earth now. That's like, does that include all the gas sticking to it, or?
No, but it's helpful to know how much water you'd need if we've got a giant glass.
Right.
Right, so let's just a couple of more things, because we've said that, because there's assumptions being made in regards to mass that, you can't have assumptions. And a hypothesis is a supposition. It's an assumption of the cause of an effect, which is why hypotheses on their own are useless, meaningless, nonsense. It's only upon actualization of the hypothesis, which is to say that your assumption, this will cause that, Well, you've got to vary what you think will cause it and show that it does actually cause it, i.e. actualize your assumption. So at hypothesis stage in the scientific method, you do have an assumption, an assumed cause of the effect. But you're going to validate that. That's the point of science. That's why it's empirical. You'll prove or disprove that which you have assumed in the hypothesis. So the supposition stage of science is still absolutely required, but to just have the assumption or define some of your terms like mass with only the assumption standing true is where you don't have your validity that you'd require with the empiricism validating an assumption, singular, independent, one on its own variable. Varying that which you assume is what you get to cause the effect, then you've validated your hypothesis. It's no longer an assumption, it's validated. Anyway, I just wanted to clear that up. The whole point of this is we don't have a phenomena in Cavendish. They're not observing anything at step one and saying, hey, what causes that? They're saying, how much does the Earth weigh? Well, that's not a cause and effect relationship, as Chocolate pointed out earlier.
Well, and also remember, in any scientific endeavor, you got to rigorously define your terms. Because if you say something does something, you got to have rigorously define what that term is or what that thing is. Correct?
Absolutely. You can't have, in the case of mass, an equivocation fallacy being utilised. You know, the definition being the same as mole. And even though it's, you know, the Royal Society for Chemistry making it clear that it's falsely identified as the amount of matter being mass, and that's incorrect. You know, then you go on normally. I don't know why it always happens like clockwork, but you'll ask someone to identify what mass is. They'll tell you it's the amount of stuff in something. When you point out that's not mass, because it's falsely being identified and cited with the Royal Society for Chemistry, they'll then go on, almost in the next breath, to define inertia. I always think when Quantum Eraser taught me that, I was like, yeah, but it's going to be unlikely that they'll immediately just define inertia straight after. But there hasn't been a time that they haven't. It's happened every time. And as soon as they do, you're like, well, that's an equivocation fallacy. We're supposed to have rigorously defined terms. We've got two definitions for the same thing in quick succession, normally within the next breath. Right, just do a quick super chat shout out. Shout out to Truth in Your Face. He's also got a channel, so subscribe today. Debunking Newton. Apple falls down, then entropy kicks in, is left over at a period of time. The apple becomes gas, which goes up. So Newton's apple goes down and up. Right on. Thank you very much indeed for your super chat. Truth in Your Face. Roscoe, if you want to check out his channel.
That brings up something else Stanek said, just so you know. He was saying that it's the weight of the water that keeps the water in the glass. But is that what keeps it in the glass over time? Because over time, entropy takes hold, and the water evaporates and goes up. Fills the available volume.
Yeah, entropy's a bitch. It's absolute. There's no overcoming entropy. So even if you're going to assert the force of gravity, this is where Sleeping Warrior used to get annoyed at me and Quantum Eraser. Have it. Have your gravity. Have it 100 times the force. It's still not going to overcome entropy, though, is it? As demonstrated by Paul's example with a glass of water. You leave it on the side, you come back, a couple of weeks later, it's all gone. Well, has it been held there with gravity? Nah. Entropy has taken hold and it's filled the available volume. As you've had a phase transition, slowly occurring the entire time that it's there. Change has happened. Entropy. Yeah, Paul's absolutely right. It's gone up. Got a couple more housekeeping questions, see if we can keep them in the hour. Any evidence of a self-perpetuating molten iron core at the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth?
No.
No? Is that it? Okay. Sometimes you get a good answer to that. Any evidence of
No.
Go on, George. Go on. I always hold out hope for this question.
No, not at all. We're actually studying that subject at the moment with my kids, and it's funny, but yeah, we need to keep within the paradigm, unfortunately.
How disappointing. Any evidence of the R value, Earth radius?
Black Swan.
You got something up, Arwen? Did you want me to present something?
Oh no, I was still stuck to the weight of the Earth and then was kind of astounded how the other planets supposedly have their weights referenced in amounts of Earth weight with a special symbol. Like,
5.972 times 10 to the 24 kilograms.
it's like, oh really? How did they confirm this?
Someone slap him. We've just been discussing it for 25 straight minutes.
I know! And it's not because I'm having a hangover, it's just because I want to be like that.
You want to be like what?
I don't know. Just looking into this shit.
Fair
and
enough.
just being astounded how much of this is out there and just accept it. And then wondering how many people looking upon that will wonder how they actually got to those numbers.
Not many. Before JLB covered it, as a flat earther, I hadn't got any clue. And then JLB, who wasn't then and still is not a flat earther, covered the fact that they're nonsense about how they weighed the Earth. And then I think it was Tiger Dan took the concept and made a video referencing John Le Bon, where he got like that Spanish guy with the horrible teeth laughing really like and talking about how the cult had him and how they had these magic balls that they said they could weigh the Earth with, ha ha ha, but now he's left the cult. Well, that was like I say, that was my first exposure to what even Cavendish was. Well, obviously there's people like Adam that have gone far further in university and have gone, no, that was something I was taught when I was doing science.
Right.
But according to Adam, he's like, but the professor says, yeah, it never works. Don't worry about it. This is what you need to write down to pass. Don't worry about the actual experiment. It doesn't never work.
Nice.
Any evidence that you can have gas pressure without the necessary antecedent of a container to press upon?
The gradient.
Redrick has a video.
So.
Oh, too many answers.
I believe there's evidence for gas pressure without containment. May we have this conversation?
Hey, we are
Go
having this
for it.
conversation.
Okay. Well, here goes. Just a couple of days ago, we spoke about a phase transition in water and how the water evaporates, goes up to the clouds and collects and drops back down. But at the same time,
Here's
if
Ask
we
My
take,
Class.
we
Teacher
take
and
what's
student
going on with
classroom
Alexa
helper.
over there?
I don't know.
Alexa's trying to debate.
Getting
My
rubbed by
bad.
Alexa.
Nobody
I've had it
said nothing
myself.
to Alexa, and she just jumped in and started talking.
I get it
Anyway.
sometimes. I'll be full on in, rah rah, and then suddenly Siri will pipe up. Anyway, feel free. You got about 30 seconds
Come out of
left.
nowhere, she started
Alexa,
talking.
what's the evidence?
Let's just shut our window. You got about 30 seconds left before I round out the live show. Go ahead.
All right. So if we go into a laboratory and recreate a container and we put gas pressure into it, we realize that the gas pressure is going to build up in there. And the only way for us to maintain a pressure gradient is with a pressure relief valve at the top that leads out to a less pressurized medium. So if here in our experience, the gas pressure that we have isn't pressing off anything from the top, what explains that?
Yeah, very good question. What's it pressing on at the top? Without the container, there can be no pressure. And with that, I'll say if you are watching this on the Nathan Oakley premiering stream, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you're watching this live on the Nathan Oakley 1980 channel, this is where we bid you farewell. A huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of you who smashed the super chat, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, and all that good stuff. Of course, a massive thank you to today's Discord and G+ panels for making today's live show possible. Once again, stay tuned if you're watching on the Nathan Oakley premiering stream. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!